This week in technical writing, we're going to be working on your resume and cover letter. For that, you will need to select a job post of your choice, and then you'll create your resume and the cover letter to go with that particular job post. So as if you were applying to that job. Before we get into that, though, we need to talk about audience and purpose. Documents succeed if they are based on an accurate understanding of the audience and have a clear purpose. This is something that is important in any technical writing, but think about how important it is if you're trying to get a job. So the first thing you have to take into consideration is audience. You want to start by analyzing your audience. You want to know who your audience is. And that can change, and you might have multiple audiences for one subject and potentially even for one document. So you really need to know who your audience is, who makes that audience up, how many different aspects of that audience you have. So do you have, one person? Do you have one group? Do you have potentially unknown numbers of people who will be looking at this document? So you really want to be thinking about that. Once you know who your audience is, you can assess what they already know about your subject. And you can do that in many different ways, but if you know who your audience is, then you'll be able to figure out, well, do they have a deep technical knowledge of this subject? Is this another engineer? Are they going to understand all of the technical jargon and how things work? And, can I talk to them in that way? Or is this someone who, is like a general hiring manager and they don't know all this technical stuff, but they want to know that you know your technical stuff, but you still have to communicate in a way that they can understand. So know what they already know about your subject, figure that out. How do they feel about your subject? This is another thing that's pretty important. Now, you think when you're applying for a job that you're going to be writing for people who feel positively about your subject, who have their own interest and enthusiasm for the subject. So you want to portray the same level of positivity and enthusiasm and interest, or more even. And then think about how they're going to use the information that you present. In the job search process, your resume is going to, first of all, most likely go through a computer system that analyzes it for keywords. So one thing you'll want to think about is including your keywords. In many job situation cases, your resume will first go through human resources, and a human resources person or group of people will analyze it for the content that they are specifically looking for, specific qualifications in that, and they will either put you in the yes to keep considering pile or the no pile. Sometimes they might have a maybe, but in general, you want your resume to end up in the yes pile. So you're going to think about how you can get your resume into that pile. So they're going to be using this to evaluate you. So you want to make sure that you are presenting yourself in the best way possible. So another thing when you're analyzing your audience is you need to figure out what you do and don't know about your audience. What are the demographics that you know and maybe don't know? What expectations and attitudes do they have both toward you and your document and the material that you're presenting? And again, what are the ways they will use your document? If you're not sure about that, that's something you're going to need to figure out. And so then figuring out some of these things that you don't already know, you can interview people. If there are people you know who work for that company or have worked for that company, you can interview them. You can read about the company, go on their website, go on their social media, check them out. You can read documents that they have produced. And remember, we're using documents in a very broad sense here. So maybe it's a paper that's been produced, or maybe it is an infographic, maybe it is an advertisement, maybe it's a video. Whatever it is, you can become familiar with what that company produces or that particular team produces, so that you can tailor your work toward what they're already doing. So you can join in their conversation that they're already having with their work. When you have a really good sense of audience, then you can go on to purpose. And this idea of audience and purpose can kind of interplay with each other. So it's not like you have to nail down audience completely and then go on to purpose and only work with purpose. You can go back and forth. This is a recursive process, but it really helps to understand your audience, and then figure out your purpose. Or possibly for some of you, it might work better to figure out your purpose and then your audience. And some of that will change based on the situation. But for right now, we're just going to go, the next stage is purpose, but you can adapt that however you need to. We write or create for many different purposes, but most purposes will fall into one of these three categories: how something occurs, how to carry out a task, or why some situation is good or bad. And if you are going with that last purpose, if your purpose falls into that category, why some situation is good or bad, then most likely you're also trying to reinforce or change the audience's attitudes and possibly urge them to take action. Now, if we think about it, when you're writing to secure employment, when you're creating a resume and a cover letter, you are trying to explain, to demonstrate why you are a good, or better than good, an excellent candidate for that position. And then you want your audience to interview you and ultimately to hire you, or at least to offer you the position, so that you are then in a position where you can say yes or no, or negotiate if you need to. So your purpose most likely is going to be working within this why some situation is good or bad. But we also have other purposes that fall into the other categories for different kinds of writing that we do. When you are trying to determine your purpose, ultimately you want to ask, what do you want this document to accomplish? What do you want readers to know or believe? You want them to know that you and believe that you are an excellent candidate for this position. What do you want them to do? Understand a concept, adopt a particular belief, carry out a task. Well, for this case, you want them to carry out the task of interviewing you and offering you the job. In order to communicate most clearly, you're going to want to use strong active verbs to represent your purpose. Excuse me. Sorry. So in order to use those strong active verbs, you're going to have to kind of know what some of those verbs are. So strong active verbs can include words that like you want to use words that communicate and words that convince. Some examples of communicating verbs include authorize, define, describe, explain, illustrate, inform, outline, present, review, summarize. And some examples of convincing verbs include analyze, argue, assess, conclude, determine, evaluate, forecast, propose, recommend, request. Now, those aren't categories that are set in stone. Sometimes what you would normally use as a communicating verb can actually be a convincing verb, or vice versa. So it just really depends on how you see things, how you want to communicate, the word that's going to work best. So you don't really have to think of, I have to have a communicating verb here. The point is to have a strong, clear verb that indicates what you want from this document. I want to inform my readers of this particular situation. I want to explain my reasoning behind this conclusion I've drawn. I want to propose this solution to the problem that we just defined. So those, using those more specific, strong verbs rather than to show whatever, but you don't want to be wishy-washy is what I'm really trying to say without using the word wishy-washy, but that really is kind of the best, I think. So, here are some examples of how you can use some of these verbs. This wiki presents the draft of our policies on professional use of social media within the organization. Or this letter authorizes the purchase of 6 new tablets for the Jenkintown facility. Or this report recommends that we revise the website as soon as possible. So sometimes you choose the verb that you will, all the time, really, you choose the verb that best works without really thinking about too much, whether it's a communicating or a convincing. If you're really choosing the verb that fits the situation, it will do what it needs to do. So if you don't take the time to understand your audience and analyze your purpose, what can go wrong? I'm going to give you an example of a situation with McDonald's. So some years ago, on the takeout bags, McDonald's decided to put world flags, so flags of different countries around the world. Great idea. And it might have been, during an Olympics event or the World Games or something like that. I'm not really sure. But it seems like a really great idea. We see a lot of division in our world, and let's face it, we have a lot of geographical ignorance in the United States. So like drawing attention to other places is a really good thing, except McDonald's made a mistake. They failed to correctly analyze, understand a portion of the audience, and that portion of the audience didn't get the purpose because they were offended, they were upset, they were, they didn't like it. And so what happened? So in including these flags, McDonald's included the flag of Saudi Arabia. Now, if you're not familiar with the flag of Saudi Arabia, it's green and it has white squiggly things all over it and a couple of swords. The swords are like these ceremonial swords. Men in Saudi have these swords. They do dances with them and ceremonies and stuff like that. It's a cultural thing. And then the words, the squiggly things, they're actually words in Arabic, and they are the Muslim testimony of faith, also called the Shahada. And so that uses the name of God and it uses the name of the Prophet Muhammad. Particularly in conservative Muslim societies, throwing away in the garbage something with the name of God or the Prophet Muhammad or any of the other prophets or any scripture from the Quran is extremely offensive. People get really, really offended. It is a very deeply held belief within Islamic culture that the name of God, the names of the prophets are to be held in the greatest respect. And throwing something away is very disrespectful in that situation. So the Saudis in particular, and then greater representatives from the Muslim world in general, were very upset by what McDonald's did. And McDonald's ended up losing public respect because of, and public credibility, because of their failure to correctly analyze their audience. And there have been many other examples of such things, big and small. That was just one that I came across recently. And so I thought I would share that one, but there are others. I can give many examples from students writing to professors and failing to understand what professors expect from students in communication. And so there is a definite failure to communicate appropriately that happens sometimes. And, that's the same as if I were to fail to take into account the expectations of my superiors, of say the dean of School of Arts and Sciences, or whatever they're going to be calling it in the future, because they're changing all the structure and everything. But right now, as far as I know, it's still the School of Arts and Sciences. And so if I were to incorrectly address the dean and write in a manner that's not appropriate, then I could have some professional repercussions there. And I would deserve them because I didn't do my due diligence in analyzing my audience and tailoring my writing to that audience. So the point here is, if you want to get the job, you need to understand the person or the people that you're writing to and for. You need to understand the company culture and what they're expecting. And you need to make sure that the way you write is going to accomplish your purpose of presenting yourself in the best way possible for the position that you're interested in. So understanding your audience, understanding your purpose. Start there, and then we can go on to the next step, which is creating the resume.